Nigeria's former president there. Now let's cross over to Washington to speak to the former US ambassador to South Africa, Dr. Jindai Fraser. Dr. Fraser, thank you very much for speaking to us. Now, I know that you first had the opportunity to speak to Nelson Mandela just after he left power. Talk to me about what he was like. Describe him, because we've heard so many wonderful things about him, how funny he was, what a great leader he was. Bill Clinton saying that he was a really good president. What are your reflections?
All of those are true. And I would also say that he was a man who, when you're in his presence, you really felt uplifted. And you also felt challenged intellectually. He was passionate about politics. He was a serious statesman. And as Bill Clinton alluded to, he represented South Africa's interests, which were not always the same as the United States. But he brought to the table his arguments. He was very passionate about them. And it was always a very good engagement. I saw this both when I fielded a few calls from him during Bill Clinton's time on the Middle East issues, as well as when he visited with President Bush in the Oval Office in 2001 and certainly in 2005 and other opportunities.
And talk us through, you touched upon there that sometimes the United States didn't share the same set of values maybe as Mandela was trying to propagate. You actually helped to get Nelson Mandela and the African National Congress off of the US terror list. Now just explain to us, remind us why it was on the US terror list and why on earth it took so long to remove him from it.
Good question in terms of why it took so long. But the reason he was on the terror list is because his own country, at that time, the National Party, the apartheid government of South Africa, had designated him as a terrorist and the ANC as a terrorist organization. And the United States, which in the 80s and even before was more aligned, frankly, with the National Party, although urging them through constructive engagement to end the system of racial segregation and oppression. But that designation of him as a terrorist and carrying out terrorist acts came through the armed struggle when Umkhonto we Sizwe was founded and the ANC took up armed struggle against a very repressive regime. Now, the United States followed suit and also labeled them as terrorist acts. And when I became the special assistant to President Bush for Africa, I came into the administration feeling that that was a historical wrong and that we needed to put America on the right side of history. And I took it up with his national security advisor, Condoleezza Rice, who also agreed, and President Bush agreed. And so for almost 8 years, we really fought to try to get them off the terror list. Simultaneously, very prominent South African officials and business leaders were coming to the United States and needed to be waived into the country because they were still designated as terrorists. And we finally were able to remove this indignity in 2008 through an act of Congress that President Bush signed into law, which essentially said that the Departments of State and the Departments of Homeland Security could now not treat anybody from the ANC that fought against the apartheid regime as a terrorist. And that legislation is in place. It's House Resolution 5690. But unfortunately, the Homeland Security Department has taken to harassing ANC members coming into the country, I'm made to understand again today. And so while we thought that it was completely done through an act of an act of Congress, and the president signing it into law, we still do have some more work to be done. And I think that President Obama and his administration should really take this up and take it up in honor of President Mandela's legacy and also to put America on the right side of history.
And Dr. Fraser, in terms of Nelson Mandela's legacy, as the former US ambassador to South Africa has still got a long way to go. It has many problems.
Sure. It does indeed. And I think that really what Nelson Mandela represents is political freedom, and he symbolizes political freedom not only for South Africa, but for all of Africa and the world. Remember that South Africa was basically the last country in sub-Saharan Africa to gain its independence as such. Now, it became independent in 1910 under the British, but because of racial segregation, it was not a democratic government. So in 1994, you had the first democratically elected government in South Africa's history, pretty much the last one across sub-Saharan Africa in terms of that political independence. Today, the quest is for economic freedom. And so there's plenty of work to be done, particularly in South Africa, where you still have such income disparity between the African population and the white population in particular, but across all lines of that society, where you have unemployment rates of almost 50%.
So a struggle, apologies for interrupting you, but a large struggle still left. But for now, Dr. Jindayi Fraser, we're out of time. But thank you so much for sharing your memories and your thoughts. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.